I'm Crystal DiMichelli, and welcome to the Forces for Nature show. Do you find yourself overwhelmed with all the doom and gloom you hear of these days? Do you feel like you, as just one person, can't really make a difference? Forces for Nature cuts through that negativity. In each episode, I interview someone who is working to make the world more sustainable and humane. Join me in learning from them and get empowered to take action so that you too can become a force for nature. Welcome to another episode of the Forces for Nature Earth X Conference series, where I bring you behind the scenes of my experiences during that week and up close and personal with some of the incredible presenters. I was really excited to chat with today's guest, Lynne Twist, because the work she does with and for Indigenous groups is near and dear to my heart. I mentioned in a previous episode how, while I was living in Panama, I was fortunate enough to get to know various indigenous tribes in the Dedian rainforest, with one of the families becoming like my own. They're from the Embera tribe. I have slept in their home, bathed in their river, been body painted with their traditional dyes, and even have the most beautiful wood carving that was given as a gift displayed prominently in our bedroom. Before Lynne and I started recording, I shared with her a favorite picture of mine. It's a picture of my husband and I with some women from the Embera tribe. We're standing with a pile of mini baskets that we commissioned from them as our wedding favors. To us, there wasn't a more special gift that we could give our guests than these containers handmade by our friends, with their local fibers, supporting their small local economy. I'll share the picture on social media. This group, being relatively close to Panama City and having the Inter-American Highway running right through their backyard, was no stranger to the pressure of modern society trying to creep in and change them. They fought to hold on to their traditions, basket weaving being one of them, which made it that much more important to me that we bought them. Their struggles of modernization pressures, land encroachment, displacement, etc., are shared with Indigenous groups all over the world. And this is something that also concerns Lynne. She's the co-founder of the Pachamama Alliance, a global movement dedicated to preserving the world's rainforests by supporting Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of these lands for centuries. The mission of the Pachamama Alliance is to create an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just world by partnering with the peoples of the Amazon rainforest and promoting a shift in global consciousness. They do this by empowering communities to preserve their ancestral lands and culture. And at the same time, Pachamama offers educational programs that inspire individuals in the so-called modern world to embrace a sustainable way of living. The organization bridges ancient indigenous wisdom with modern world solutions to address the global ecological and social crises. But Lynne's impact goes far beyond that. She's also a renowned author, speaker, and global activist who has dedicated over 50 years to tackling some of humanity's greatest challenges, from ending world hunger to transforming our collective relationship with money and resources. No big deal. She's all about purpose, and the way she describes how we can all find our own purpose resonated with me so much. I think it might strike a chord with you as well. Hi, Lynne. Thank you so much for joining me on Forces for Nature. It's so great to have you.
Delighted to be here with you also.
I love the work that you do. And at the 2018 Drawdown event that kicked off Climate Week in New York City, you noted your commitment to reallocate money from fear, destruction, and consumption to love, light, and the preservation of life and the well-being of our communities. How does this ethos inspire you in the work that you do?
Oh my goodness, I'm glad I said that. That sounds so good. Well, how does that work? Or say that again. What the question?
How does that ethos inspire the work you do?
Well, I've been in what most people call the nonprofit sector my whole life, for really 50 years almost. And I don't call it nonprofit. I call it social profit, because we generate this huge profit for the social good. And to say it's nonprofit is to be insulting to the millions of organizations and billions of people who are doing everything they can to make the world a better place. And when I say social profit sector, I mean social profit, PROPHET. Not only do we generate a social profit, but we're social profits. In other words, we stand, like you do, for a future that we all dream of. And we're standing there living from those principles, reaching back into the time we're in now. My work with fundraising and philanthropy and working on hunger and poverty, and now on indigenous people's wisdom and preserving the natural world and turning around the climate crisis, all of this takes money, but the kind of money that is carrying that commitment, that power, that energy, that, I say money is like water, that it's neutral, but it can be toxic and poison, or it can cleanse and purify and makes things grow. That's the way water is. If water is held and hoarded, just like in a toxic kind of situation, it makes the people who are holding it sick. Money does too. So money is innocent, and the way we use it and our relationship with it is where a transformation is really needed. Everybody wants money flowing towards the highest good. Everybody really wants that, but our little egos get in the way and we think it has to be just for us. When in fact, the power of money is when it's moving, not when it's stagnant, when it's moving towards the highest good. So as a fundraiser, as a philanthropist, as a person working with the natural world, it's so obvious to me that money is like water. It doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to all of us. And it just needs to keep moving, and we need to give it our imprimatur as we send it along, which is our love. So anyway, I don't know if that's what you were kind of getting at, but that's one of the ways I look at life, and that's the way I want it all to be.
No, it's beautiful. I love that. And I want to hone in on the work that you're doing with the natural world, the climate crisis, indigenous peoples. You and your husband founded the Pachamama Alliance.
We did with our friend John Perkins. He's in there too.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. What's the mission of this organization?
The mission of the Pachamama Alliance is to empower the indigenous people of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon, who are the natural custodians of those forests, to protect their land and culture, not just for themselves, but for the future of life, which is what they want. So our real mission is to bring forth an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. And by that, I mean, we're really beginning to look at the problem and the mythology and the misunderstanding of human supremacy. There's a lot of supremacies that everybody's working on, but human supremacy is where it all began, and where we think we're supreme, when in fact, we need to transform human supremacy into human responsibility and sacred reciprocity with the earth, each other, and the community of life. So in many ways, that's what the Pachamama Alliance is working on, because indigenous people have really showed us, taught us, partnered with us in a way that we understand that the big problem is the role of our species, the role we're playing. We've just lost our way.
From my understanding, part of the work that you're doing with these individuals is not directly with them. It's actually in the modern world. How are we in the modern world impacting their ecosystems and their communities? And what kind of work are you doing to bridge it?
Well, we do work directly with indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest, in the Sacred Headwaters region. We work with 30 indigenous nations. We started with the Achuar, and then we started working with the Shiwiar, and then we started working with the Zapra, and then the Waorani. And as more and more success and capacity to protect those forests came from those people strengthening the indigenous federations and the indigenous people's understanding of the outside world and how to protect themselves from the industries that were kind of pushing very, very hard to get in there, oil and mining in particular. There was so much success that other indigenous groups decided they wanted to join the Pachamama Alliance also. So we work very directly with indigenous people, and they really are the leaders of the Pachamama Alliance. When you're asking me about how we work with people in our part of the world, or what is often called the modern world, the lessons we've learned from indigenous people who hold the highest good being the community rather than the individual. They don't individuate the way we do. If the community is healthy, then everybody in the community is healthy. If someone gets sick, the whole community works to have that person get well. Everything is communal. Land is communal. Food is communal. Hunting is communal. Songs are communal. Everything's communal. And there's such a beauty in that we've learned, for example, that's just one example of the many lessons we've learned from indigenous people. They aren't fighting to protect the forest. They aren't fighting to save the earth. They are of the forest. They are of the earth, really preserving itself. So those lessons, that way of seeing the world, that worldview has had a huge impact on us. And we created a series of educational transformational programs for people in our part of the world using indigenous wisdom to help us shift, transform our worldview so that rather than being all about what can we take, what can we consume, how much more can we get, to being people who are really willing to bring forth a new way of being. The new way of being environmentally generative and sustainability now is not quite enough. We want to regenerate the world we want. We want to regenerate ecosystems. We want to be socially just about the way we do that. So everyone is included, particularly frontline communities, particularly Black and Brown people who are hurt first and worst by the climate crisis. And we really want to also make sure that not only are things socially just and environmentally regenerative, but they're also spiritually fulfilling. And that's a tall order. I mean, I think that's what everybody wants, but we're actually working on it day in and day out with these online courses that we do. One is called Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream. It's called that because the indigenous people told us that the big problem is the dream of the modern world. Actually, the dream of the modern world is becoming a nightmare for ourselves and all forms of life. Everybody thinks they want more of everything, when in fact, that's the very recipe for disaster. And what we really need to do is create a world where there's enough for everyone, everywhere, to have a healthy and productive life. And we have that world now. There's enough for our need, Gandhi said, but not for our greed. The Pachamama Alliance works on shifting the lens, the worldview, the way of seeing for the modern world so that we live sustainably in communion with each other and the natural world, and that we're thinking about how to live in a way that honors all children of all species for all time.
I'm going to certainly include links to those courses within the show notes.
Oh, yay. We have a wonderful, wonderful set of suite of programs. So I'm going to say what they are. So Awakening the Dreamer is an online program. It's also delivered live, but online is very available. Then we have something called the Game Changer Intensive, which is about really changing the whole game. What are the structures and systems that need to be transformed that we're stuck in that will allow us to change the whole game? And then we have the Climate Action Now training, which is only an hour long, but you start to look at climate action and how climate justice is a huge part of that. And then we have something called Getting into Action, which teaches you where you're living, what your watershed is, what your bioregion is, so that you start to relate to not your town necessarily as its name or its industry, but what is the watershed? What is the ecosystem that's supporting you and all the businesses and all the people in your area? So all of these courses are on the pachamama.org website. Yeah.
I'm going to check them out for myself as well.
Good.
So do you have any examples that you can share to illustrate how you are empowering those individuals, those groups?
The indigenous people or the modern world people?
The indigenous people.
Yes. So the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, the first indigenous group we visited was the Achuar people, and they called us to them. I
was going to ask, how did it even come to be?
Well, it's a very mystical story, but I was lucky enough to know my dear friend John Perkins, and he and I were in Guatemala in a shamanic ceremony with a Mayan shaman. There was no medicine. It was really a beautiful ceremony in the middle of the night in a rural area of Guatemala. That shaman, along with the other people who were with us, asked us to journey. And by that, he meant lie down, with our feet towards a fire that was in the center of a circle. And we were like a wagon wheel of people around that fire. And then he started to chant and to drum. And it was so compelling and so mesmerizing that all of us, but particularly me, went into a kind of an altered state. And I became some sort of a large bird with very huge wings and a beak on my face. And this is you could say it was a dream, but it felt so real. It was a very, very powerful journey, we'd call it in shamanic practice. And as this big bird, I began flying over a vast, unending forest of green. And it was so beautiful and so blissful and so glorious. And this forest, I could see through the canopy down to ground level and little creatures running around on the forest floor. I had a cute vision as this giant bird. And then these disembodied faces of men with orange geometric face paint on their faces and yellow, red, and black feather crowns on their heads. These faces started floating up from the forest floor to me, this big, big bird, and a calling to the bird in a strange tongue. And then they would disappear into the forest again, and I would keep flying almost like in slow motion. And then they would arise again and speak in this strange tongue or call to this bird. And it was beautiful, it was blissful, it was hypnotic, it was mesmerizing, it was an awesome encounter. And then at a certain point, I heard this loud bang, 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 bang drum beat. And I realized it was the shaman kind of calling us back from our visioning. And I sat up and realized I didn't have any wings and I didn't have a beak, but I'd had a very, very, very powerful vision. And at the end of the ceremony, after the shaman completed it, he talked to John Perkins, my colleague, and me. And John had had a very similar dream. So the shaman said, "You're being called. This was not a normal vision. You received a message from someone somewhere that you need to go to." And I kind of didn't believe that. I didn't know what that possibly could be. But John Perkins, who had worked for years in the Ecuadorian Amazon, knew right away that this was a call from the dream culture of the Achuar and that they were communicating through the dream reality to call people to come to them for first contact because they had successfully avoided contact with the modern world for hundreds of years. And so John and I organized a trip for 12 people to go and see the Achuar and begin their connection, their encounter with the modern world. And that encounter, that first meeting with the Achuar leaders in the deep, deep, deep remote rainforest of Ecuador, right on the equator where the biodiversity is highest of anywhere on Earth, magical, miraculous conversations took place and encounters, and that was the beginning of the Pachamama Alliance. I was working then on hunger and poverty with the Hunger Project. So I had a full-time job. I had 3 kids. I didn't have time to think about the Amazon rainforest or take on any other projects, but this experience was so compelling, so mesmerizing, so incredible that my husband, Bill, who was with us, and we became the co-founders of something that we didn't know what it was, but eventually we called it the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama means Mother Earth. And the word alliance really refers to the alliance between the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and conscious, committed people in the modern world like you and I for the sustainability of life. And that was in 1994, 95. So it's 30 years ago now, and now we work with 30 indigenous nations in the sacred headwaters region of the Amazon rainforest and are empowering them to put this whole 100 million acres in permanent protected status so it can never be touched, no matter what governments come and go, and so that this precious ecosystem, which is the source of the Amazon system, which is the source of life, can be preserved in perpetuity.
And how are you helping them? Like, what's an example of how you're empowering them?
Well, when we first came to them, they had no communication with the outside world. There's no roads there. We flew in a small plane. And the first thing they wanted was radios. Radios in every community, which were days walk apart in the jungle, no roads. The rivers are not navigable. So the communities would be like 100 people here, 60 people there, but 3 or 4 days walk apart. They wanted radios to be in communication with each other so that they could protect their forests when oil explorers were trying to get into that forest to see if there was oil underneath that forest, which there is. So we provided radios, shortwave radios, and radio stations in the major small communities, but the bigger communities throughout the thousands of acres of rainforest. And then the next request was maps, because they did their own mapping, but they really didn't have maps, and the government did. The government was, in many cases, colluding with oil companies to get in there. So the young people walked the entire territory and did hand-drawn maps, and then we made them more accurate with global positioning equipment from the satellite. And that was a second project. A third project was they really wanted to teach their children to read and write in their language, not in Spanish. They didn't want their kids learning about Queen Isabella in Spain, or the books that their children were getting from the government schools, which were placed strategically throughout the territory. So we had all the elders and the young people come together and write stories of their traditions, their shamanic practice, the understanding of the natural world, the mating season for this particular kind of bird, or the way this tree moss is a home for this kind of spider, etc. So the children were reading about their own life, their own forest, their own traditions. And so we made Achuar, their language, into a written language. So those were the kind of projects in the early days. Now we support them in their federations. Each nation has a political federation, which is like their governing body. And the Pachamama Alliance funds the overhead, the cost of satellite technology, of cell phones, so that they can actually defend their territory. We helped them organize. We taught them about money. They needed to understand this weird stuff called money. They told us, you can't eat it, you can't hunt for it. Why does everybody want it? So now it's 30 years later, they're very sophisticated in understanding what they're up against in the modern world, and we're their partners in that. But they've kept out oil company after oil company, mining company after mining company, with their spiritual power and with their understanding of what a precious ecosystem they are the stewards of. So all kinds of ways we support them, but those are some of the ways.
Amazing. From what I've seen and have been told by my indigenous friends in Panama, the modern world often goes into their communities and tells them what they need. How can we instead work with them?
Well, I'll just say, when we went to Ecuador the very first time, we had never been to South America. We didn't speak Spanish. We knew nothing about the environment in 1994-95. And that was a godsend, because we had no agenda. We were not trying to fix something or save something. We were invited by them. And they told us, there's a famous indigenous quote, which I will quote. They said, if you're coming to help us, don't waste your time. But if you're coming because you know your liberation is bound up with ours, then let's work together. And that's always been the ethic of the Pachamama Alliance. They're in charge. They tell us what they need. We see if we can help them have that to empower them to protect their forest. But they also said in our very first encounter, the real problem is the dream of the modern world. So not only do we want you to educate us about the modern world so that we can defend ourselves and have modern world partners to help us defend ourselves, but we also request that you go home and work to change the dream of the modern world, and we'll help you with that. So we help them with their encounter with the modern world, and they help us disentangle ourselves from the insanity of the modern world. So it's a total mutually benefit relationship. We don't have advice for them. We don't know how to preserve the forest. They do. They are incredibly masterful at preserving their rainforest and understanding it. And they have a lot of teachings for us about how to extract ourselves from the insanity of the modern world. So it's a mutually beneficial partnership. We don't advise them. We listen to them. We listen deeply. We collaborate. We tell them the things that they need to know if they ask for it, but they don't want anything more than they need to save their forest and to preserve their way of life. They're not looking to accumulate anything. They only use money with the outside world, not with each other. So it's a very tender, powerful, and important relationship. And thank you for asking about that, because that's really an important part of what Pachamama Alliance is really good at.
I love to hear that. You have lived such a full, purposeful life. How do you suggest people find their purpose?
Well, people ask me that all the time. I've been so fortunate to have met people along the way that guided me, that inspired me, that helped me see that I could be a useful person. And I hope I provide that for other people. But one of the ways that I answer that question when people ask me, I ask them to look and see very deeply what truly breaks your heart in this world. There's many things that break your heart, maybe, and many things that break mine, but what is the fundamental thing that gives you the most angst? What breaks your heart most? And then when they look at that, then I say to them, now tell me what makes your heart sing? What lights you up? What makes you feel really awesome about who you are and the opportunities of being alive right now? And then they answer that question. And then we work together to see that usually what breaks your heart and what makes your heart sing are related. And you can put them together and make a committed life out of what breaks your heart and what makes your heart sing. So those are some clues.
You're making me all teary. It's just so cheesy of me.
Oh, it's not cheesy. It's wonderful to be moved. That's what makes the world work, is when people are moved to tears. So thank you.
Thank you. Can you tell me about a moment when you said to yourself, this is why I do it? A proud moment, a success story, if you can relate it to the indigenous work.
Well, for years, the Achuar were facing huge, scary, wealthy, corrupt, actually, oil companies that were using any tactic to get into Achuar territory. And they had cut up this gorgeous, amazing territory of several million acres into what are called oil blocks, oil concessions, and had paid the government to get in there and drill for oil. If I could show you a map of that part of the forest, and then the lines that were drawn, block 16, block 22, block 24, with the intention to go in there and drill for oil, which is so devastating to the forest and particularly the spirit of the forest. After maybe 8 to 10 years of our work to help them prevent that from happening, all those oil blocks are gone. Those lines are off the map, and there are no oil incursions. There's still no roads. The rainforest is absolutely pristine. It's intact, and the indigenous people have had victory after victory after victory in the courts, with oil and mining companies losing and indigenous people winning. So I'm really proud of that. And I'm also proud that in 2008, there was a new constitution written in Ecuador. And embedded in that constitution, because of the indigenous people and our support of them, is the first country in the world to embed and enshrine in its constitution legal rights for nature under primary constitutional law. So in Ecuador, nature has rights in court. A river system, a species, a forest can be defended in court by lawyers. And we have a whole team of lawyers now in Ecuador that defend nature in court, and they win over and over and over again against huge businesses. So I'm very proud of that. And then the third thing is a story. Can I tell a story?
Yes, please.
And this really, it's not a victory or something that we accomplished. It's just something that has really inspired me. And it's like a taproot. One of the first times I went to Zapara territory, and the Zapara people, Sapara, are facing extinction. There's only 635 of them left. And I went to Zapara territory, and I was by myself, and the leader of the Zapara people is Manari Ushiwa. He's a shaman, and he's the leader. And he and I were walking through the forest, which he does every day. He lives there. And he had a machete, and he was cutting the path. Without the machete, we couldn't have gone 10 feet. And as he was cutting the path, he, being an indigenous man, and this is his home, he had just a kind of a sarong on. He had no clothing on, and he was barefoot. And he had his feather crown, and his face was painted. And I had on every possible piece of clothing. I had a long sleeve safari shirt and long pants, and I had sprayed myself like crazy with mosquito repellent, and I was just totally covered with protection from this strange, scary place. And it was early in my understanding of being in the forest, and I was following him, and I had high boots, I had rubber boots, so everything was covered except my face, frankly. And he's just cutting the trail, and at a certain point, he stopped, and he turned around, and he said to me, "Can you feel them?" And I stopped, and I didn't know what he was saying. He was speaking in Spanish, and I didn't understand the words, but I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, "Shh, can you feel them?" And then I started to open my eyes and open my ears and open my body and open my senses. And then he said it one more time. He said, "Can you feel them? The millions and millions of souls." And once he said that, I realized that for him, every leaf, every bug, every snake, every bird, every flower, every termite nest was a soul. They all had souls, and he related to all of that as his kin. And in that moment, my defenses dropped. I felt the millions and millions of souls that we were walking through. And I will never, ever, ever forget that. It changed me forever. And now when I'm outdoors, when I'm indoors, wherever I am, I realize that from that moment on, I'm in touch with a dimension, a reality, a space, a clearing that I never knew was there. And it's so powerful and so nourishing, and it moves me to my core. And from there, I now do my work to preserve not only the rainforest and the indigenous people who live there, but the long-term future of all life, all children of all species for all time.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, yeah.
How can the listener do the same? How can the listener help these peoples? How can the listener lead their best lives?
Well, they can go to the Pachamama.org website and join any of our programs. But most of all, it's to realize that there's so many actions to take, and please take them. I've learned that worry is a form of negative prayer. So I invite you to stop worrying about the environmental crisis that we're in and get actively involved in transforming it in whatever way is yours to find your path. There's millions of organizations that have all kinds of activities. They're local, they're global, they're regional, they're national. There's millions and millions and millions of them. And I invite every person who hears my voice right now to get involved, get engaged, give money, get your hands in the dirt, plant a garden, reduce your waste. Never again, ever allow yourself to drink water out of a plastic bottle. That's one of the worst things. Just say no and get either a boxed water or get a glass and go to a drinking fountain. Find ways to change the way you're living day after day after day that has you in concert, in communion with a long-term future of life. Think of your grandchildren, think of your great-grandchildren, think of future generations, and look and see, are you regenerating life or are you destroying it with every single interaction? And there's a wonderful website, regeneration.org, where there's a whole series of questions you can ask yourself before you take any action that'll help you find your path to being a regenerative human being. So take Pachamama programs, go to the regenerative.org website, and stop worrying and get yourself into action.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lynne, for all that you're doing. You're making a difference.
Thank you so much, Crystal. It was wonderful being on your program, and thank you for being the beautiful being that you are.
Thank you. I can't help but wonder if part of the angst so many in the world are feeling is because they don't have a sense of purpose. I've heard something similar before, and maybe what Lynn proposes could help. As she shared, finding your purpose can begin with a simple reflection. Ask yourself what truly breaks your heart in this world. What is it that you cannot turn away from? The thing that brings you pain, yet feels urgent. Then look to what makes your heart sing. Those things that bring you joy, fulfillment, and energy. Often, what breaks your heart and makes your heart sing are intertwined, leading you to a unique path of service and meaning. Perhaps you would even find meaning by connecting with traditional indigenous wisdom. Pachamama has resources for this. Whichever way, finding your purpose can help you craft a life of meaningful contribution, grounded in service to the greater good. If we all did that, then just maybe we could all benefit, even those in the deepest corners of the furthest rainforests. Don't forget to go to forcesfornature.com and sign up to receive emailed show notes, action tips, and a free checklist to help you start taking practical actions today. Do you know someone else who would enjoy this episode? I would be so grateful if you would share it with them. Hit me up on Instagram and Facebook at Becoming Forces for Nature and let me know what actions you have been taking. Adopting just one habit could be a game changer, because imagine if 1 million people also adopted that. What difference for the world are you going to make today?